Clara Mayhew stood before the gates of Blackwood Manor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had never encountered a place so imposing, a fortress of wealth and silence. The wrought iron gates groaned open, revealing a winding drive flanked by ancient oaks whose bare branches clawed at the gray sky, leading toward the grand estate. The house itself was a behemoth of dark stone and tall, unblinking windows that seemed to stretch infinitely upward. She tightened her grip on her worn bag, her knuckles white, whispering to herself that this was merely a job, a position as Leo's nanny and nothing more. Crossing the threshold into the manor, a profound chill snaked down her spine, the air within still and cool, the silence almost a physical weight. She was met by a butler who led her through the grand hall, where portraits of the Sterling family hung in gilded prisons, their painted eyes seeming to follow her with an air of detached judgment. She fought to anchor her thoughts on the task ahead, caring for a young boy, but a deep, unsettling feeling that something was fundamentally wrong here was impossible to ignore. As the butler guided her toward the living quarters, her gaze was snagged by something at the far end of the hall. A large photograph in a stark black frame, hung with unnerving prominence. She stopped dead, the air leaving her lungs in a sharp gasp. It couldn't be. She moved closer, her hands trembling as she stared at the image. The woman in the photo was her mother. Clara felt the world tilt on its axis, the floor seeming to drop away from her. Her mother, who she'd been told had perished in a car accident when she was just a girl, was here. Her image, enshrined in the home of the Sterlings. How was this possible? The shock was a physical blow, forcing her to brace a hand against the cold wall. "Is everything all right, miss?" The butler's voice sliced through her daze. Clara hastily pulled a mask of composure over her features, swallowing the hard lump in her throat. "Yes," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. "I'm fine." But she was far from fine. How could she be? Her mother, gone for what felt like a lifetime, was somehow entwined with this family. But why? And how? The questions spiraled in her mind, a dizzying vortex of confusion as she tried to process the impossible sight. The butler carried on, leading her through the labyrinthine manor, pointing out various rooms as they went. Clara, however, heard nothing he said. Her mind consumed by a frantic race for answers. She had to understand how that photograph came to be in this house. Eventually, they arrived at the room that would be hers. It was spacious, with a large window overlooking the sprawling, manicured gardens. The furnishings were opulent, a world away from anything she had ever known. Clara placed her bag on the bed, her mind still ensnared by the image in the black frame. After the butler departed, Clara took a deep, shuddering breath and sat down. She couldn't allow this to consume her. Not yet. She had a job to do, and her focus had to be on that first. There would be time for investigation later. But the ghost of her mother's face, staring out from that photograph, haunted her every thought. Later that evening, Clara met Leo for the first time. He was a quiet boy, no more than 6, with large, inquisitive eyes and a timid nature. A pervasive melancholy clung to him, a shadow she immediately recognized but couldn't place. He was hesitant with her initially, but as the evening progressed, he slowly began to open up, asking her small questions about her life and where she came from. Clara found herself genuinely smiling as they spoke. It felt good to forge a connection with him, to offer him a sense of comfort. Despite the strange and deeply unsettling start to her time at Blackwood Manor, she reminded herself that her primary duty was to Leo. She was here to care for him, to make him feel safe and secure. As the night deepened, Clara tucked Leo into bed, reading him a story until his eyelids grew heavy and he drifted into sleep. She lingered by his bedside for a few moments, watching him sleep, his small face peaceful for now. Whatever darkness pervaded this house, she would do everything in her power to shield him from it. But as she walked back to her own room, the profound unease returned. She couldn't dislodge the image of her mother from her mind. What was her mother's connection to this place, and why had no one ever told her? She was drowning in questions with no answers in sight. Not yet. Once in her room, Clara sat at the small desk by the window, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the polished wood. She knew she had to learn more, but she had no idea where to begin. The Sterlings were a formidable family, and digging into their secrets could be perilous. Still, the image of her mother's face was a brand on her mind. She could not ignore it. Clara made a silent vow to herself right then and there. She would find out the truth, no matter the cost. She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens below. The moonlight cast long, skeletal shadows across the grounds, lending the scene an eerie, haunting beauty. Clara knew she had stepped into a world far more intricate and dangerous than she had ever anticipated. But she was ready. Whatever secrets the Sterling family was hiding, she would unearth them. And it all began with that one photograph. The next morning, Clara awoke to a soft knock on her door. She blinked away the last vestiges of a restless sleep and sat up, still disoriented by the surreal events of the previous day. As she dressed, her thoughts relentlessly returned to the photograph of her mother. The weight of unanswered questions was a physical pressure upon her. After a quick breakfast, Clara found her way to the living room, where Julian Sterling was seated at a massive mahogany desk, his attention locked on a pile of documents. He barely registered her entrance, his expression cold and distant. His forbidding demeanor only amplified the manor's unsettling atmosphere. Clara felt a powerful urge to confront him directly about the photo, but something in his icy gaze made her hold back. The timing was wrong, she told herself. She shifted her focus to Leo, who was playing quietly on the floor with a set of wooden blocks. The little boy offered her a shy smile, and Clara felt a surge of protective warmth for him. He was quiet, but sweet, and she sensed a deep loneliness in him, a longing for companionship. As the day unfolded, Clara tried to concentrate on her duties, but the image of her mother in that frame gnawed at her. How could her mother have been connected to the Sterling family? She'd never even heard the name before this job, yet here they were, living in this grand, cold mansion with her mother's face displayed on the wall as if she belonged. The chance to investigate came later in the afternoon, when Leo drifted off to sleep during a quiet moment in the garden. Clara gently settled him into his bed, and, with a quick glance over her shoulder to ensure she was alone, decided to explore the manor by herself. The hallways of Blackwood Manor were vast and silent, the air thick with the scent of old wood and lemon polish. She walked down the corridor where she had first seen the photograph, her footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous quiet. When she reached the black-framed picture, she stood motionless, staring at it with a swirling mix of confusion and disbelief. There it was again, her mother's familiar face, captured in a photograph that looked decades old. Clara's fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the frame. What was her mother's connection to this place? And why was it displayed here with such prominence? Before she could summon the courage to investigate further, she heard a sound behind her, a soft clearing of the throat. Clara whirled around, startled, to find herself face to face with an older woman in a crisp black uniform. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her sharp blue eyes studied Clara with a guarded curiosity. "You must be the new nanny," the woman stated, her voice low but firm. "I'm Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Is there something I can help you with?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't want to expose her hand, especially to a stranger. But the urgency to find answers, to understand her mother's link to the Sterlings, was overwhelming. "I noticed this photo," Clara began cautiously, nodding toward the picture. "The woman in it. She looks a lot like my mother, Mrs." Gable's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "That's an old photo," she said flatly. "It's been here for many years. Perhaps it's just a coincidence." Clara didn't believe in coincidences of this magnitude. She wanted to press further, but the housekeeper's tone had shifted, becoming more guarded, as if she'd already said too much. Clara sensed she wouldn't get any more information from her, at least not directly. "Do you know who she was?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Mrs. Gable shook her head. "I'm afraid I don't know the details. I've been with the Sterling family for many years, but I handle the household, not the family's history." Clara nodded, though disappointment chewed at her. It was clear Mrs. Gable knew more than she was letting on, but for now, Clara had to accept the stone-walled answer. As Mrs. Gable excused herself and walked away, Clara remained alone in the hallway, her mind racing. The housekeeper's momentary hesitation had confirmed what Clara already suspected. There was more to this story. But for the time being, she would have to wait. The rest of the day passed without incident, though Clara found it nearly impossible to concentrate. As she read to Leo in the afternoon, her thoughts drifted back to the photo and to Mrs. Gable's cryptic response. Was her mother somehow bound to the Sterling family's past? And if so, why had she never spoken of it? That evening, Clara sat in her room, staring out the window at the darkening sky. She could feel the weight of the manor's secrets pressing down on her, and the thought of unearthing them both thrilled and terrified her. She knew that if she pushed too hard, she might uncover truths best left buried. But she also knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. The next step, Clara decided, would be to learn more about the history of the Sterling family. If her mother was connected to them, there had to be clues somewhere in this vast house. And if the housekeeper wasn't talking, perhaps other staff members would be more forthcoming. As she lay in bed that night, Clara renewed her promise to herself. She would discover the truth about her mother's connection to the Sterlings, no matter what it took. The pieces were all here. She just needed to fit them together. And with that thought, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the manor's dark past lurking in the shadows of her mind. The days at Blackwood Manor crawled by, each one steeped in a quiet sense of foreboding that Clara couldn't shake. She had made scant progress in uncovering the truth about her mother's connection to the Sterlings. Mrs. Gable had become even more distant, and Julian was as aloof as ever, barely acknowledging her presence unless it pertained directly to Leo. But something was wrong with Leo. Clara was with him constantly, and though he was polite and generally well-behaved, a profound sadness lingered in his eyes that deeply unsettled her. He often seemed lost in his own world, playing with his toys in silence, never truly engaging with her or anyone else. He avoided eye contact, and when he spoke, it was usually in a whisper. Then came the nightmares. One evening after dinner, Clara put Leo to bed as usual. She read him his favorite story, hoping to soothe him, but she could sense his profound unease. His small body trembled beneath the covers, and his wide eyes darted nervously around the room, as if expecting something to materialize from the shadows. Clara tried to comfort him, gently brushing the hair from his forehead. "You're safe here, Leo," she whispered, hoping her words could reach him. "I'm right outside if you need me." Leo nodded, but offered no response, his eyes still wide with a fear that seemed far too deep for a child his age. Clara stayed by his side until he finally drifted into a fitful sleep, though his face remained tense, even in slumber. That night, as Clara lay in her own bed, she couldn't stop thinking about Leo's behavior. Something was clearly haunting him. Something more than simple childhood fears. She wondered if his nightmares were connected to the same mysteries that plagued her own thoughts. The house, and her mother's photograph. It wasn't long before her suspicions were chillingly confirmed. In the dead of night, Clara was jolted awake by the sound of screaming. She leaped out of bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she raced down the hallway to Leo's room. The screams were his. Terrified, desperate cries that echoed through the manor's empty halls. When Clara burst into the room, she found Leo thrashing in his bed, his face contorted in sheer terror. He was crying out for someone he called the lady. Clara rushed to his side and gently shook him awake. "Leo, wake up. It's just a nightmare," she whispered, trying to calm him. But when his eyes snapped open, they were filled with a raw, visceral terror. The lady. She was here, he whispered, his voice trembling. She came again. Clara's blood ran cold. She knelt by his bedside, striving to keep her voice steady. "What lady, Leo? Who are you talking about?" Leo stared at her, his small body still shaking. "The lady in the white dress," he whispered. "She comes at night. She watches me." A chill crept down Clara's spine. "What does she look like?" she asked softly, trying to mask her own rising fear. Leo hesitated before answering, his voice barely audible. "She has long hair. Dark, like yours. And she looks sad." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could this mysterious woman in Leo's nightmares be connected to the secrets of the Sterling family? Could it be her mother? She tried to dismiss the thought as too outlandish, too surreal to even contemplate. But there was something in the way Leo described the woman, the long, dark hair, the sadness in her eyes, that made Clara's mind race with impossible possibilities. "Leo, I promise you, no one is going to hurt you," Clara said softly, trying to reassure him. "I'm here, and I'll make sure you're safe." Leo nodded, but he still looked deeply shaken. He lay back down, clutching the edge of his blanket tightly. Clara sat beside him until his breathing evened out, and he eventually drifted back to sleep. But even then, she could see the tension in his small body, as if he were bracing himself for another visit from the mysterious woman in his dreams. As Clara walked back to her room, her thoughts were a tangled mess. She couldn't ignore the similarities between Leo's description of the woman and her mother's appearance. Could it be that Leo's nightmares were somehow connected to her mother's past? Was her presence still lingering in this house, trying to communicate something to Leo through his dreams? Clara didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing for sure. There was more to this house than met the eye. Leo's nightmares were just another piece of the puzzle, one that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The next morning, Clara decided she had to bring up Leo's nightmares with Julian. She found him in his study, as usual, absorbed in his work. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure how to breach the subject. When Julian finally looked up, his eyes were distant, as if he had already dismissed her before she had even spoken. "I wanted to talk to you about Leo," Clara began, her voice steady but firm. Julian raised an eyebrow, clearly uninterested. "Is there a problem?" "It's about his nightmares," Clara continued, refusing to be deterred. "He's been having them frequently, and he mentioned something last night. Something about a woman in a white dress." For a brief, unguarded moment, Clara thought she saw something flicker in Julian's expression, a flash of recognition, or perhaps concern. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by his usual stoic mask. "He's a child," Julian said dismissively. "Children have nightmares. It's nothing to worry about." Clara clenched her fists, frustration bubbling up inside her. This isn't just a normal nightmare. He's seeing someone, a woman. I think it could be important. Julian stood up abruptly, his movement cutting her off. "Drop it, Clara," he said coldly. "Leo's fine. There's nothing more to discuss." With that, he turned his back on her and returned to his desk, signaling that the conversation was over. Clara stood there for a moment, seething with frustration. She had hoped Julian would take her concerns seriously, but it was clear he had no interest in acknowledging whatever was happening in his house, or in his son's mind. But Clara wasn't going to give up. She knew there was more to this story, and she was determined to find out what it was. Leo's nightmares were only the beginning. Clara couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over her since the night of Leo's nightmare. The image of the woman in the white dress, as described by Leo, haunted her thoughts. She found herself obsessively replaying his words in her mind, trying to make sense of it all. Who was this mysterious figure? And why was she visiting Leo in his dreams? And why did she resemble her mother so much? Determined to uncover the truth, Clara knew she had to confront Julian again. Even though he had dismissed her concerns the last time, she needed answers. About Leo's nightmares, about the woman, and most importantly, about her mother. But approaching Julian was no easy task. He was guarded, distant, and quick to shut down any conversation that veered too close to personal matters. The opportunity presented itself one afternoon when Clara found Julian alone in the library. His usual stern expression softened as he thumbed through an old leather-bound book. She hesitated for a moment, watching him from the doorway. This was her chance to push for the truth. But the memory of his cold dismissal from before made her pause. Gathering her courage, she stepped inside. "Julian," she called out softly. He looked up from his book, his brow furrowing slightly. "Clara," he replied, his voice calm but not welcoming. "Is there something you need?" She nodded, walking toward him, her heart pounding. "I need to talk to you about Leo, about his nightmares." Julian's face hardened immediately, his jaw tightening as he closed the book with a sharp snap. "We've already discussed this," he said, his voice clipped. "Leo is fine." "No, he's not," Clara pressed, feeling her frustration rising. "You may not want to admit it, but something is very wrong. He keeps seeing this woman in his dreams and—" "I told you to drop it," Julian interrupted, his voice growing sharper. He stood up, towering over her as if to physically end the conversation. "Children have nightmares. It's nothing to dwell on." Clara clenched her fists at her sides, refusing to back down this time. "David described her in detail," she said, her voice rising slightly. "A woman in a white dress with long, dark hair. She watches him, and he's terrified of her. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Julian's expression flickered again, just like it had the first time she brought up the nightmares. Clara could see it now. He recognized the description. But just as quickly, he masked his emotions, his face returning to its usual stoicism. "This conversation is over," he said, turning away from her. "No, it's not." Clara's voice was louder now, echoing through the quiet library. She couldn't let him shut her down again. "I know you're hiding something, Julian. This woman. Who is she? Why does Leo keep seeing her?" Julian froze, his back still to her. For a long moment the room was silent, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she waited for his response, her breath caught in her throat. Finally, Julian turned around, his face as unreadable as ever. But there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger. Fear. She couldn't tell. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly, though his voice was tight with restrained emotion. "There's nothing here for you to understand." Clara took a step closer, her voice softer now but still firm. "I saw the photo, Julian," she said. The one in the hall. That's my mother in that picture, isn't it? Julian's eyes flashed, and for a brief second, Clara thought she had finally broken through his armor. But then, just as quickly, his expression hardened again. You're mistaken, he said coldly. Your mother has no connection to this family. Clara felt a surge of frustration. She was so close, but Julian was refusing to give her the truth. She took a deep breath, her mind racing for the right words. She couldn't afford to lose this moment. Please, she said quietly, her voice almost pleading now. Just tell me the truth. Why is my mother's photo in your house? Why is Leo seeing her in his dreams? There's something going on here, and I need to know what it is. For a long moment, Julian didn't respond. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on hers, the tension between them growing thicker by the second. Clara could see the conflict in his expression, the desire to keep his secrets hidden versus the weight of the truth that was clearly burning inside him. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice low and strained. There are things about this family that you can't know, things that are better left in the past. Clara shook her head. I deserve to know, Julian. This isn't just about your family. This is about mine, too. My mother. She's connected to all of this, isn't she? Julian looked at her, his expression tight with frustration, and something else. Regret, perhaps. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a sharp cry. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. David, she gasped, bolting toward the door. Julian was right behind her as they raced up the stairs to Leo's room. When they burst through the door, they found him sitting up in bed, trembling and pale. His sheets were tangled around him, and a glass of water had fallen from his nightstand, shattering on the floor. Clara rushed to his side, kneeling beside the bed. David, what happened? Are you okay? Leo's eyes were wide with fear as he clutched his blanket tightly. She was here again, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The lady. She was here. Clara felt a cold chill creep down her spine. She glanced up at Julian, who stood frozen by the door, his face ashen. Whatever he had been hiding, it was clear that Leo's nightmares were more than just the imaginings of a frightened child. Julian took a deep breath, his eyes still fixed on Leo. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a resigned weight. There's more to this than you know, he admitted, his words barely above a whisper. But you're right. It's time you learned the truth. The next morning, Clara awoke with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Julian's final words the night before echoed in her mind. It's time you learned the truth. But what truth? What had he been hiding? And why had it taken so long for him to admit that something was wrong? As she prepared for the day, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Leo's nightmares weren't just the typical fears of a child. They were connected to something much deeper, something from the past. And now Julian was ready to reveal what that something was. Clara just hoped she was prepared for whatever she was about to learn. After breakfast, she found Julian waiting for her in the library. The heavy curtains were drawn back, allowing streams of sunlight to pour into the room. But despite the brightness, the atmosphere felt heavy and foreboding. He was standing by the large oak desk, his hands resting on a stack of old, weathered letters. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she approached him, her eyes drawn to the faded papers. These, Julian said quietly, gesturing to the letters, are what you've been looking for. They're the key to understanding everything. Clara swallowed hard, her eyes flicking from the letters to Julian's face. What are they? She asked, though she had a feeling she already knew the answer. They're letters from your mother, Julian said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. Letters she wrote to me years ago. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Letters from her mother? How had Julian had these all along, and why had he kept them hidden? She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was ready to read them, but the need for answers was too strong. She reached for the stack of letters, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up the first one. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As Clara unfolded it, she felt as though she were holding a piece of her past that had been lost for so long. "Dear Edward," the letter began. "I don't know how to explain everything that's happened, but I need you to understand why I've made the choices I have. It wasn't just about you, or even about me. It was about protecting her, our daughter." Clara's heart stopped. She read the words over and over again, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Our daughter. Her mother had written these words to Julian about her. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this? What does this mean?" Julian sighed heavily, his eyes clouded with a mix of regret and sorrow. "Your mother, Eleanora, and I, we were more than just acquaintances. We were married. We were in love. And you, Clara, you are our daughter." Clara felt the floor shift beneath her, as though the world she had known had suddenly crumbled away. "No," she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. My mother, she died when I was a child." Julian's expression softened, and he looked at her with a sadness she hadn't seen in him before. "That's what you were told, but it wasn't the truth. Your mother didn't die in a car accident. Her death was faked, and she was forced to leave you behind to protect you." Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelation. "Why would she do that?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would she leave me?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with the explanation. "It was because of my family, the Sterlings. We've always been powerful, and with that power came enemies. Your mother discovered something dangerous, and she knew that if she stayed, both of you would be at risk. She made the hardest decision of her life. She left to keep you safe." Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes as she processed his words. Everything she had believed about her past had been a lie. Her mother hadn't abandoned her out of neglect or accident. She had done it out of love, out of a desperate attempt to protect her daughter from a danger Clara had never even known existed. She glanced down at the letter again, the words blurring through her tears. The rest of the letter spoke of her mother's love for both Clara and Julian, of the life they had shared before everything fell apart. Nora had never stopped caring for them, even after she was forced to leave. Clara felt a sharp pang of sorrow for the mother she had never truly known. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why did you let me grow up believing she was dead?" Julian's face hardened slightly, though there was still regret in his eyes. "I wanted to, but it wasn't that simple. There were people watching. People who would have done anything to destroy us if they knew the truth. Your mother made me promise to keep you safe, to let you live your life without the shadow of our family hanging over you." Clara shook her head, her emotions swinging between anger and sorrow. "But I didn't live my life. I grew up wondering why I had no family. I spent my whole childhood feeling like something was missing. And now I find out that I had a family all along." Julian stepped closer, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Clara. I know it wasn't fair to you. I've carried that guilt for years. But your mother and I, we did what we thought was best." Clara wiped at her eyes, trying to make sense of the flood of emotions overwhelming her. The weight of the past was crashing down on her, and yet there was still so much she didn't understand. She looked back at the letters, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "Is this why Leo's been seeing her in his dreams?" she asked softly. "Because she's connected to this house? To this family?" Julian hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that this house has a way of holding on to the past, whether we like it or not." Clara's heart ached as she glanced out the window, the weight of her mother's sacrifice settling heavily on her shoulders. There were still so many questions left unanswered, but at least now she knew the truth about her origins. "I need to find her," Clara whispered, her voice resolute. "I need to know what happened to her." Julian nodded, his expression solemn. "We'll find her, Clara. Together." As Clara clutched the letters tightly, she knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. She had uncovered the truth about her past, but now she had to confront the reality of what that meant, and the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. Clara could barely sleep that night. The weight of the revelation. Julian was her father, and her mother's death had been a fabrication, keeping her awake, her mind racing through a maze of emotions. The letters had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through, but now there was no turning back. Her mother had sacrificed everything to protect her, and Clara knew she had to honor that sacrifice by uncovering the full truth. The next morning, she found Julian in the study, already poring over old documents, his face tired, as if the burden of the past was finally catching up to him. Clara joined him, feeling the tension between them. Although he had promised to help her, she knew there was still much he hadn't told her. "I've been looking through some of my father's old papers," Julian said as she entered. He gestured to the piles of documents scattered across the desk. "Your mother, Eleanora, she was involved in something bigger than we initially thought. It wasn't just about protecting you. She stumbled upon something that put all of us in danger." Clara sat down across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What was it?" Julian handed her a folder, its edges frayed with age. Clara opened it slowly, revealing pages of legal documents and business contracts, all bearing the Sterling family name. But as she flipped through the papers, she noticed something strange. There were names she didn't recognize, signatures that didn't belong to any of the Sterling family members she knew of. "These people," Julian said, pointing to the unfamiliar names, "were part of a business deal my father was involved in. But it wasn't legal. It was dangerous, and it had to do with smuggling, something I wasn't even aware of at the time." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Smuggling? Smuggling what?" Julian sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of it all was too much to bear. "Weapons. My father, Prescott, was involved in illegal arms deals, and Nora found out. She had no idea what she was stepping into. She thought it was just a family secret. But when she tried to confront him, things spiraled out of control." Clara's hands trembled as she held the documents. This wasn't what she had expected. Her mother had been caught up in something far more dangerous than a family dispute. "So she left? To protect me from this?" Julian nodded grimly. "She had no choice. If she had stayed, they would have come after both of you. My father had powerful connections, and once Nora threatened to expose everything, she became a target." Clara's mind raced. Her mother had been forced into hiding to protect her from dangerous criminals, and her father, Julian, had been powerless to stop it. She felt a wave of anger rising in her chest. How had her life been so deeply affected by choices she hadn't even known about? And why had her father kept this from her for so long? "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why did you let me believe she was dead?" Julian looked at her, his face etched with guilt. "I didn't want to drag you into it, Clara. I thought if you didn't know, you could have a normal life, away from the dangers of my family. But now I see that keeping this from you was a mistake." Clara stared at him, her emotions swirling between anger and sadness. Part of her wanted to lash out at him for the years of lies, but another part understood that he had been trying, in his own flawed way, to protect her. Still, it didn't erase the pain she felt. "I had a right to know," she whispered. "She was my mother." Julian nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "You're right, and I'm sorry. But now that you know the truth, we need to find out what happened to her. If she's still alive, we need to know where she is." Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. Not now. There was still so much they didn't know, and the dangers her mother had faced might still be lurking in the shadows. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Julian handed her another folder. "There's one more thing you need to see. This is the last letter she sent me before she disappeared completely. After this, I never heard from her again." Clara took the letter, her hands shaking as she unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting was her mother's, neat but hurried, as if she had written it in a moment of panic. "Edward," the letter began, "I don't have much time. They're closing in on me, and I can't stay in one place for long. I've done everything I can to keep Adriana safe, but I fear my time is running out. If anything happens to me, please take care of her. She's the only thing that matters now. You need to know that I've left clues in the house, hidden in places only you would know. Find them, and you'll understand everything. But be careful. They're still watching." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she read the final lines. "Clues in the house?" she murmured, glancing up at Julian. He nodded. "I think she's talking about this mansion. There are places I haven't looked in years, hidden compartments, secret rooms. My family's been using this house for generations. Who knows what's been hidden here?" Clara stood up, her resolve hardening. "Then we need to find them. Whatever she left behind, it's our only chance to understand what really happened." Together, Clara and Julian began searching the mansion, combing through the rooms, closets, and old furniture. Julian showed her places he remembered from his childhood, hidden compartments in the walls, secret drawers in the old cabinets. They worked in silence, both of them focused on finding the clues Nora had left behind. It wasn't until late in the evening, when Clara was searching through an old wardrobe in one of the guest rooms, that she found something. Tucked away behind a false panel, she discovered a small box, its surface covered in dust. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out and carefully opened it. Inside were more letters, dozens of them. Some were from her mother, but others were addressed to her mother, written by someone else. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read the name on the first letter. James Dawson. Julian was beside her in an instant, his face pale as he looked at the letters. "My father," he whispered. These are his letters to Nora." Clara's heart raced as she pulled out one of the letters and began reading. The words on the page revealed a side of the Sterling family she hadn't expected. A side filled with manipulation, threats, and betrayal. Prescott Sterling had been the one behind the smuggling operation, and when Nora had found out, he had tried to silence her. He was the one who made her disappear. Clara whispered, her voice shaking. "Your father. He's the reason she had to leave?" Julian looked devastated, his eyes dark with the realization of what his own father had done. "I had no idea," he muttered. "I knew he was involved in illegal dealings, but I never thought—" Clara clutched the letters tightly, feeling the full weight of the truth settling over her. The pieces were finally coming together. But with each new discovery, the danger seemed to grow. "We need to be careful," Julian said, his voice low and filled with urgency. If my father was capable of this, there may still be people watching us, people who don't want us to uncover the truth. Clara nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. They had come this far, and now there was no turning back. Clara sat in the quiet of the Manor's drawing room, the weight of the letters she and Julian had uncovered sitting heavily in her lap. The revelations were overwhelming. Her mother, Nora, had been forced to leave because of the dangerous, illegal dealings of Julian's father, Prescott Sterling. Worse yet, Prescott had been the one who orchestrated her disappearance, silencing her before she could expose the truth about the Sterling family's criminal activities. The more she learned, the more Clara's heart ached. Her mother hadn't just left her. She had sacrificed everything to protect Clara from a life of danger, caught in the crossfire of a powerful family's darkest secrets. Julian sat across from her, his hands clasped together, his face pale. He had spent the last few days unraveling the sins of his own father, discovering truths he had never wanted to face. But now that it was all laid out in front of him, he had no choice but to confront the past. "We can't stop now," Clara said, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of determination that surprised even her. "We need to find out what really happened to my mother. We know she was forced into hiding. But is she still alive?" Julian nodded slowly, though the weight of the question seemed to press down on him. "I've been thinking about that. If she left clues for us here, then maybe she was planning to come back one day. Maybe she didn't think it was safe yet." Clara looked out the window, her gaze fixed on the sprawling gardens below. The thought that her mother might still be out there somewhere, alive, waiting, sent a jolt of hope through her. But with that hope came fear. If her mother was still alive, why hadn't she reached out? Had something gone wrong? "What do we do now?" she asked, turning her attention back to Julian. "There has to be more. More that we haven't found yet." Julian rubbed his temples deep in thought. "There are a few more places we haven't checked. My father had a study in the east wing of the house that he rarely used. He kept it locked, but I know where the key is. If there are any more documents, they'll be there." Clara felt a surge of urgency. Every step they took brought them closer to the truth, and she couldn't stop now. She had to know what had happened to her mother, and she needed to find out if Nora was still alive, somewhere, waiting for the danger to pass. They made their way to the east wing of the manor, a part of the house Clara had rarely ventured into. The long, dimly lit hallways felt different, colder, more foreboding than the rest of the estate. It was as if the secrets hidden here had left an imprint on the very walls. When they reached the door to Prescott Sterling's study, Julian hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the brass doorknob. "I haven't been in here since before my father died. I don't know what we'll find, but I'm prepared for it." Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's do it." Julian unlocked the door, and together they stepped into the study. The room was dark, the heavy curtains drawn tight, casting the space in shadows. Dust coated the furniture, and the air smelled stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. They moved cautiously, searching the room for anything that might lead them closer to the answers they sought. Julian went straight to the large mahogany desk, rummaging through drawers and sifting through stacks of old papers. Clara, meanwhile, was drawn to a large bookshelf that covered the far wall. Her fingers skimmed over the spines of the old books, looking for anything out of place. Her eyes caught on a small, leather-bound journal tucked between two thick volumes. It was nearly invisible, hidden away so carefully that she almost missed it. She pulled the journal from the shelf and flipped it open, her eyes scanning the first few pages. It wasn't a book. It was a diary. Her mother's diary. "Julian," she called softly, her voice shaking as she held up the journal. "I think I found something." He crossed the room quickly, his eyes widening as he saw what she was holding. "Is that—" Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "It's her writing. My mother's." Together they sat down and began reading. The diary chronicled Nora's final months in Blackwood Manor, from the moment she discovered Prescott's illegal dealings to the day she fled to protect Clara. Her entries were filled with fear and heartache, but there was also hope. Hope that one day she would be reunited with her daughter. "I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden," one entry read. "James is growing suspicious, and I fear he'll discover what I know. But I can't leave Adriana behind. I've arranged for her to be taken somewhere safe, but my heart breaks every time I think of her growing up without me. I only hope she'll forgive me one day." Clara felt tears prick her eyes as she read the words. Her mother had been so close to being found out, yet she had continued to fight for Clara's safety. It was clear that Nora had loved her deeply, even in the face of overwhelming danger. As they neared the final pages of the diary, Clara's heart raced. There was one last entry, hastily written, the ink smudged in places. "They're coming for me. I don't have much time. I've left instructions with Edward to protect Adriana, but I fear it may not be enough. If anyone finds this journal, please know that everything I've done was for her. I won't let James destroy my family, not without a fight." Clara closed the diary, her hands shaking. The last entry was dated only a few days before Nora had disappeared. It was clear now. Nora had left not just to protect Clara, but to take a stand against the Sterling family's corruption. Julian's face was pale as he looked at her. "I had no idea how much she had been fighting behind the scenes," he whispered. "She was braver than I ever gave her credit for." Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "She was trying to save us, and now we need to find out where she went." Julian stood, determination filling his expression. "We will. And if my father's crimes are still casting a shadow over this family, we'll bring them to light. Together." They knew they had to finish what Nora had started. They had to find out if she was still alive. And more importantly, they had to bring justice to those who had forced her into hiding. As they left the study, Clara felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. The truth about her mother was within reach, and she wasn't going to stop until she uncovered it all. The discovery of Nora's diary gave Clara a new sense of urgency. Every word, every entry, had painted a picture of a woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter and paid the ultimate price to protect her. Clara couldn't help but feel closer to her mother now, even though she was still separated by the fog of the past. But something told her that Nora's story wasn't over. Not yet. There was still a chance she could be alive, and Clara was determined to find her. Over the next few days, Clara and Julian searched every corner of the manor, looking for more clues that Nora might have left behind. They revisited every hidden compartment, every forgotten room, and every piece of furniture that might hold a secret. It was a slow process, but Clara refused to give up. She could feel it. There was more to discover. One afternoon, while searching in the attic, Clara found an old chest tucked away behind a pile of dusty boxes. Its lock was rusted, and the wood was worn, as if it had been untouched for years. Clara called Julian over, and together they pried it open. Inside the chest was a collection of documents, old photographs, and letters. More pieces of the puzzle. But what caught Clara's attention most was a small, leather-bound notebook that lay at the bottom of the chest. It was different from the diary she had found earlier, smaller and less worn. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the first page. The handwriting was familiar. It was her mother's. As she flipped through the pages, her heart raced. This notebook was different from the diary. It wasn't personal thoughts or feelings. It was a record of Nora's last movements before she disappeared. The entries were short and to the point, detailing where she had gone, who she had met with, and what she had discovered about Prescott Sterling's illegal dealings. Clara's fingers trembled as she read through the entries. Each one revealed more about the danger Nora had been in, but also about her determination to bring down the criminal network Prescott had built. It was clear now. Nora had been working in secret, gathering evidence to expose the Sterling family's corruption. But she had never had the chance to finish what she started. One entry in particular stood out to Clara. It was dated only a week before her mother had disappeared. I've made contact with someone who can help. They know about James's operations, and they have the power to bring him down. But I can't trust anyone. Not yet. I need more proof before I hand everything over. I'll be meeting them at the safe house in a few days. If something happens to me, I've left everything they need hidden here. Adriana, if you ever find this, know that I did this for you. I love you always. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The safe house. It had to be where Nora had gone before she disappeared. But where was it? Julian, look at this, Clara said, handing him the notebook. She mentions a safe house. Do you know where that could be? Julian furrowed his brow, flipping through the pages. I remember hearing something about a property my father kept off the books. It was a small cabin in the woods, not far from here. He used it for private meetings, away from prying eyes. But I haven't been there in years. Clara's pulse quickened. Do you think that's where she went? It's possible, Julian said, his expression darkening. If she was meeting someone in secret, that's where she would have gone. Clara stood up, her resolve strengthened. We need to go there. It could be the key to finding out what really happened to her. Julian hesitated for a moment, his face clouded with worry. If this place was tied to my father's operations, it could still be dangerous. There might be people watching it, waiting for anyone to come snooping around. Clara shook her head. I don't care. We have to go. This is our only lead, and I'm not going to sit around waiting for answers. Julian saw the determination in her eyes and finally nodded. All right, we'll go. But we'll need to be careful. If anyone is still involved in my father's old network, they won't hesitate to stop us. Later that afternoon, they packed a small bag with supplies and set out for the safe house. The drive through the dense woods was tense, the quiet of the forest amplifying the weight of their mission. Julian hadn't been to the cabin in years, but as they neared the location, the memories came flooding back. This is it, Julian said quietly as they pulled up to a small clearing. The hemlock cabin was barely visible through the trees, its wooden frame weathered and covered in moss. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But Clara's gut told her that this place held the answers they were looking for. They approached the cabin cautiously, every sound in the forest making Clara's heart race. The air was thick with tension as Julian unlocked the door, the creaking of the old hinges echoing through the quiet woods. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, the furniture covered in dust. It looked like no one had been there in years. Clara's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might stand out. There were papers scattered on a table in the corner, old books on a shelf, but nothing that seemed important. Then, as she turned toward the back of the cabin, she noticed something strange, a floorboard that looked out of place. Julian, over here, Clara called, kneeling down to inspect the floor. She pried up the loose board, revealing a small compartment underneath. Inside, there was a metal box, its surface covered in dust. Clara's hands shook as she lifted it out and opened it. Inside the box were several documents, More evidence of Prescott Sterling's criminal operations. But there was something else. An envelope addressed to Adriana. She stared at it for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Adriana," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't make it back to you. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. But I hope you'll understand why. I did everything I could to protect you from the dangers that surrounded us. If I couldn't be there to watch over you, I hope this letter will give you the answers you've been searching for." Clara's hands trembled as she continued to read. The letter detailed everything her mother had done to expose Prescott Sterling's illegal activities, how she had tried to protect Clara from the fallout, and how she had been planning to return for her once it was safe. "I love you more than anything in this world," the letter concluded. "I hope you can forgive me for leaving. Please know that everything I did was for you." Clara clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, all to keep her safe. And now, finally, she understood the full extent of that sacrifice. Julian stood beside her, his expression somber as he read the documents in the metal box. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is the proof. Everything we need to take down what's left of my father's operation." Clara nodded, her tears drying as a new resolve took hold of her. "Then we're going to finish what my mother started. We're going to expose the truth." The drive back from the Hemlock cabin was silent, the weight of what Clara had discovered in her mother's letter sitting heavy on her chest. She kept the letter folded tightly in her hand, as if letting go of it might somehow make everything unravel. Her mind raced with the gravity of what lay ahead. Nora had left everything behind to protect her, to shield her from the darkness of the Sterling family's legacy, and now Clara found herself tangled in the very web her mother had fought so hard to escape. As the car rolled back into the driveway of Blackwood Manor, the large estate that had once felt cold and imposing now seemed even more haunted. There were ghosts here, ghosts of the past, of secrets, and of lies that had twisted her life into something unrecognizable. Julian turned off the engine and sat quietly beside her. He hadn't spoken much since they had left the cabin, and Clara could sense that he was grappling with his own internal storm. His father's involvement in illegal arms smuggling, the betrayal of his own family, and now the guilt of not protecting Nora when he had the chance. It all weighed heavily on him, and now he was facing the consequences of those choices. "We can't stay here," Clara finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "If people find out that we have these documents, they'll come after us, just like they came after her." Julian nodded, but his gaze was distant. "You're right. We'll need to be careful. There are still people connected to my father's operations. People who won't want this information getting out." Clara looked down at the letter in her hand, her thumb tracing the edge of the paper. "Do you think she's still alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian hesitated, his face filled with uncertainty. "I don't know. I want to believe she is, but after all these years, I can't be sure." The uncertainty gnawed at Clara. The hope that her mother might still be alive felt fragile, like a delicate thread she was afraid to pull too hard. But if there was even the slightest chance, she had to keep searching. Inside the manor, the tension between Clara and Julian grew heavier. The closer they got to the truth, the more difficult their relationship became. Clara couldn't help but feel anger bubbling inside her. Anger at the secrets Julian had kept from her, at the choices he had made that had allowed her mother to disappear without a trace. She knew he had been trying to protect her, but it didn't erase the years she had spent feeling lost and abandoned. "I trusted you," she said suddenly, her voice sharp as they stood in the hallway. "I trusted you to tell me the truth, And all this time, you knew more than you were letting on." Julian flinched at her words, his expression darkening. "It wasn't that simple, Clara. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" she interrupted, her voice rising with emotion. "You didn't protect me. You let me live in the dark, wondering what happened to my mother, while you knew. You knew there was more to the story." Julian took a step toward her, his hands clenched at his sides. "I didn't know everything, Clara. I didn't know my father had done this. I didn't know he was responsible for Nora's disappearance. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to find out that my father was capable of this?" Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to yell, to scream at him for the years of silence, for the lies, for the pain that had been buried under layers of secrets. But she couldn't. She could see the pain in his eyes, the regret that had been building up inside him for years. "I'm sorry," Julian said, his voice softening. "I should have told you more. I should have trusted you with the truth. But I thought if I kept it hidden, if I kept you safe, you wouldn't have to deal with all of this." Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall. "You didn't keep me safe. You just kept me in the dark." The silence between them stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Clara could feel the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on her, threatening to crush her under its weight. But at the same time, she knew they couldn't afford to let this tear them apart. They were on the same side now, fighting for the same goal, to uncover the truth and to finish what Nora had started. "We need to work together," Clara said finally, her voice steady. "Whatever happens next, we need to be on the same page. We can't let this tear us apart." Julian nodded, though the pain in his eyes hadn't faded. "You're right. We have to finish this." As they stood there in the hallway, the manor around them seemed to grow even colder. The weight of the past still loomed over them, but now they had a direction. They had the documents, they had the proof, and they had each other. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. If Prescott Sterling's associates found out what they were doing, they wouldn't hesitate to stop them, just as they had tried to stop Nora all those years ago. The danger was closer than ever, and Clara could feel it closing in on them. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Every memory she had of Nora felt distant, like a dream she could barely grasp. But now, with the letters and the documents, her mother's presence felt closer, more real. She could almost hear her voice, almost feel her touch. Clara clutched the letter to her chest, closing her eyes as the tears finally began to fall. She had spent so many years wondering, searching, and now she was finally starting to understand. Her mother had been a fighter, someone who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's safety. And now, Clara knew, she had to live up to that legacy. She couldn't stop now. She had to finish what her mother had started. The next morning, Clara and Julian gathered in the study once again, the stack of documents and letters laid out in front of them. They had a plan: take the evidence to the authorities, expose the illegal dealings that had been hidden for so long, and bring down what was left of Prescott Sterling's network. But as they prepared to leave, a knock echoed through the manor, sharp and insistent. Clara and Julian exchanged a glance, both of them tensing. They hadn't been expecting anyone. Slowly, Julian moved toward the door, his hand hovering over the handle. When he opened it, two men stood on the other side, their expressions cold and calculating. "Edward Dawson?" one of the men asked, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to talk." Clara felt her heart drop. She knew immediately who they were. Prescott Sterling's associates had finally found them. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen at the sight of the two men at the door. There was no mistaking who they were, remnants of Prescott Sterling's criminal network. They were here, and they had come for the documents. Her heart pounded in her chest as fear coursed through her veins. Julian, standing in the doorway, kept his expression neutral, though Clara could sense the tension radiating from him. "We're not here for a conversation, Mr. Dawson," one of the men said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Hand it over, and this can all be over quickly." Clara glanced at Julian, her mind racing. The documents, the evidence they had gathered, were their only chance to expose the truth. But these men clearly knew about them. If they handed the papers over, all of Nora's sacrifices would be for nothing. And if they didn't, who knew what these men were capable of? Julian's eyes flickered toward Clara for a split second, a silent message passing between them. He couldn't hand the documents over. They had come too far to give up now. Slowly, he stepped back from the door, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Julian said, keeping his tone steady. "There's nothing here for you." The man's expression hardened, his jaw clenching as he stepped forward, pushing the door open wider. "Don't play games with us. We know about the documents. You've been digging where you shouldn't have." Clara's heart raced as the second man stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. She knew they couldn't let these men find what they were looking for. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, but she stood her ground, refusing to back down. "We don't want any trouble," Julian said, his voice still steady, though Clara could hear the tension beneath the surface. "But we're not giving you anything." The first man let out a low chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't a negotiation." Before anyone could react, the second man reached for something inside his jacket, something metallic that gleamed in the dim light of the manor. Clara's heart dropped as she realized what was happening. A gun. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the man leveled the gun at Julian, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Give us the documents, now!" Time seemed to slow down as Clara's mind raced. She needed to do something, anything, to stop this from spiraling out of control. Her eyes darted to the desk where the papers were hidden, then back to Julian, whose gaze remained fixed on the man in front of him. "I know where they are," Clara blurted out suddenly, her voice shaking but loud enough to draw the men's attention. Both of them turned toward her, surprised by her sudden outburst. Julian's eyes widened, but Clara gave him a subtle shake of her head, trying to convey her plan. She needed to stall, to buy them some time. "I'll get them for you," she said quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. Just don't hurt anyone." The man with the gun hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You better not be lying," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," Clara said, her voice trembling. "They're upstairs. I'll go get them." The two men exchanged a glance, then nodded. "Go," the first said. "But don't take too long. We're not patient." Clara turned and quickly made her way toward the staircase, her mind racing as she ascended the steps. She needed to think of something, some way to get out of this without handing over the documents. As she reached the top of the stairs, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She knew the layout of the house well by now. There was a small, hidden compartment in the wall of the upstairs study, one she and Julian hadn't explored yet. It wasn't large enough to hide all the documents. But maybe, just maybe, it could hold the most important ones. As she reached the study, Clara quickly made her way to the hidden compartment, her fingers fumbling as she pried it open. Inside was just enough space to tuck away a few key papers, the ones that directly implicated Prescott Sterling in the illegal operations. She shoved the documents inside and sealed the compartment, her heart pounding in her chest. Now came the hard part. She grabbed a handful of old, irrelevant papers from the desk, papers that would look convincing enough from a distance, and hurried back downstairs. She could feel the weight of the men's gaze on her as she re-entered the room, holding the stack of papers tightly in her hands. "Here," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "These are the documents you're looking for." The man with the gun stepped forward, snatching the papers from her hands. He rifled through them quickly, his eyes scanning the pages. Clara held her breath, praying that he wouldn't notice the missing files. After what felt like an eternity, the man grunted and tucked the papers under his arm. "This better be everything," he said, his tone threatening. "It is," Clara lied, her heart still pounding. The men exchanged a glance, then finally backed toward the door. "We'll be watching you," the first man warned, his eyes locking onto Julian's. "If we find out you've been holding anything back, we won't be so polite next time." With that, they turned and left, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. The tension in the room lingered, thick and suffocating. Clara let out a shaky breath, her knees weak with relief. Julian moved toward her, his expression filled with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "That was close," he murmured, his voice low. "You saved us." Clara shook her head, her hands still trembling. "I just bought us time. They'll figure it out eventually. We need to act fast." Julian nodded, understanding the urgency. "We need to take the real documents to the authorities. We can't wait any longer." Clara glanced toward the stairs, where the hidden compartment held the crucial evidence that could bring down the remnants of Prescott Sterling's criminal empire. "We'll get them," she said, her voice steady. "And then we'll finish this for good." Julian looked at her, his expression filled with determination. "For Teresa," he said quietly. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of her mother's legacy pressing down on her. For her. With the danger looming closer than ever, Clara knew they had no choice but to move quickly. The time for hiding was over. Now, it was time to fight. The tension in the manor hung thick in the air as Clara and Julian made their final preparations. The documents were safely hidden upstairs, but they knew it wouldn't be long before the men realized they had been deceived. The threat was real, and the stakes had never been higher. Clara could feel the weight of her mother's legacy pressing down on her. She had to finish what Nora had started. "We don't have much time," Julian said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get these documents to someone we can trust before they come back." Clara nodded, her mind racing through their options. The authorities would be their best bet, but they needed someone who wasn't connected to the Sterling family. Someone who wouldn't be influenced by the power and corruption that had plagued their name for so long. "There's a lawyer," Julian said suddenly. "An old friend of my mother's. He's one of the few people my father never managed to corrupt. If we can get the documents to him, he can take them to the authorities without any interference." Clara felt a glimmer of hope. "Do you trust him?" "With my life," Julian said. "He's the only person I know who will make sure justice is served." They quickly gathered the real documents from the hidden compartment upstairs, their movements quick and deliberate. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she held the papers that could finally expose the truth about Prescott Sterling's criminal empire. This was it, the moment they had been fighting for. As they prepared to leave the manor, a sense of dread settled over Clara. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something dangerous. The two men had made it clear that they weren't going to let this go easily, and she knew they would be watching. They had to move quickly and carefully. Just as they stepped outside, the sound of tires crunching on gravel sent a jolt of fear through Clara's chest. A black car pulled up to the front gate, its headlights cutting through the twilight. Julian's face went pale as the car door opened and the two men from earlier stepped out, their expressions cold and determined. "They're back," Julian muttered under his breath. "We need to go now." Clara's heart raced as she and Julian ducked behind the side of the manor, trying to avoid being seen. They couldn't let the men get their hands on the documents. Everything depended on getting them to safety. As they moved quietly along the side of the house, Clara could hear the men's voices, sharp and angry. "They're hiding something," one of the men said. "I knew those papers were fake. They think they can outsmart us, but we're going to find them." Clara's breath quickened as she realized how close they were. If the men found them now, everything would be lost. She glanced at Julian, whose face was set in grim determination. "We'll have to make a run for it," Julian whispered. "The car is parked at the back. If we can make it there without them seeing us, we'll have a chance." Clara nodded, her body tense with adrenaline. They moved quickly, keeping low as they made their way around the manor. Every step felt like it stretched out into eternity, the fear of being caught looming over them like a dark cloud. Finally, they reached the car, and Julian quickly unlocked it, motioning for Clara to get in. Just as they were about to pull away, the sound of footsteps behind them made Clara's blood run cold. "There they are!" The shout came from one of the men, and before Clara could react, she saw him raise a gun, pointing it directly at them. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ducked down, fear gripping her body. "Go!" she shouted at Julian, her voice filled with panic. Julian slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching as the car sped down the driveway. Clara's pulse raced as they careened toward the front gate, the black car close behind them. "They're following us!" Clara shouted, glancing in the rearview mirror. The men were gaining on them, their car speeding dangerously close. Julian's face was grim as he swerved onto the main road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Hold on," he said, his voice tense. "We can lose them if we get to the city." Clara's heart raced as they sped through the winding roads, the landscape blurring around them. The black car was still behind them, the men inside determined to stop them at any cost. "We need to get off the main road," Julian said, his voice tight with focus. "They'll catch up if we don't." Clara scanned the road ahead, her mind racing. Just as they rounded a corner, she spotted a narrow side road, barely visible through the trees. "There!" she shouted, pointing to the road. Julian swerved onto the side road, the car bouncing over the uneven ground as they sped through the dense woods. The black car followed, but the narrow road made it harder for them to keep up. "We're losing them," Clara said, her voice filled with relief as the black car began to fall back. Just as they thought they had escaped, the sound of gunshots shattered the air. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the back window of their car shattered, glass spraying everywhere. "They're shooting at us!" she gasped, ducking down as more shots rang out. Julian's face was pale with concentration as he pushed the car faster, trying to outrun their pursuers. The road was rough and winding, but they were gaining distance, the black car falling further behind with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the black car disappeared from view, the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. Clara let out a shaky breath, her hands still trembling. "Did we lose them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian nodded, though his face remained tense. "For now. But we need to get to the lawyer as quickly as possible. They'll come after us again if they find us." Clara nodded, her heart still racing. They had narrowly escaped, but the danger wasn't over yet. They had to get the documents to safety, to make sure that everything Nora had fought for wouldn't be in vain. Hours later, they arrived at the lawyer's office, exhausted but determined. The lawyer, an older man with kind eyes, welcomed them in without hesitation. He listened carefully as Julian explained the situation, his face growing more serious with every word. "You did the right thing coming here," the lawyer said, taking the documents from them. "I'll take care of this. The authorities will be notified, and the people involved in this will be brought to justice." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was finally over. The documents were in safe hands, and the truth would finally come out. Nora's legacy would be honored, and the corruption that had destroyed so many lives would be exposed. As they left the lawyer's office, Clara looked up at the sky, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her thoughts turning to her mother. "I hope you're proud of me." Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with quiet gratitude. She would be. Together, they walked into the future, leaving behind the shadows of the past. But Clara knew that her mother's spirit would always be with her, guiding her toward a life filled with hope and justice.